Hello, symbol lovers. This time around, I'm going to give you 5 principles used to decipher the symbols of Hieronymus Bosch. And I'm going to demonstrate how they work by using them on this illustration. So our first principle is, it is what it is, but not what it seems. It's exactly what it looks like. So what does it look like? It looks like a man hanging with his intestines hanging out. How do we know what it is? We figure it out by reading the Bible. In this case, Matthew 27, 3 and 5. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was filled with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. So Judas threw the silver into the temple and left. So Judas had the money, threw it in the temple, and then he went away and hanged himself. So this is Judas hanging himself, except for the business about the intestines. To find the gory intestines, we need to check in with Acts 1:18. And this is supposed to be Peter speaking. Peter, someone who knows things. And it reads, "Now, with the reward, Judas bought a field, and there he fell headlong and burst open in the middle, and all his intestines spilled out." So the question becomes, how can both stories be true? To begin with, the timeline of events doesn't add up. It says that Judas got the money, bought a field, and then went to visit the field and somehow burst open in the middle until all his intestines spilled out. And that he fell. It was accidental. But in Matthew, it says that he was filled with remorse and he still had the money and returned it to the temple and then hung himself. So then we come back to our principles. And our principles tell us what to do. So it is what it is. We are going to take the facts as recorded in the Bible as true. We'll take them at face value. That is, that both of these opposing views are true, just as the artist has done here. That Judas was hanged, but as well his intestines, when they found him, were hanging out. Those are the facts. Artists in the Middle Ages struggled to make sense of these facts. But because we read symbols using the principles outlined here, we know to be skeptical, because both these things can't be true. You can't throw the money back in the temple and buy a field. And when people hang themselves, their intestines do not burst out. And when people fall in fields and their intestines do burst forth, they do not then hang themselves. They cannot be found hanging the next day after such an accident. So all is not what it seems. We can't say for sure what's going on, but we do know the facts in the case. A man was found hanging with his intestines hanging out. We know the Bible account is a lie, so the question is, what are they lying about? What are they not telling us? And so to figure that out, we are going to follow the money. So, according to Peter, Judas was paid the money, he went out and bought a field, he did the terrible deed, he went back to examine his field, where he fell, it was all an accident, and burst open. Okay, so that's Peter's story, but the other story says that Judas was filled with remorse. He was paid the money, did the deed, that dirty deed, and then went back and threw the money back. So he still had the money. He didn't buy a field with it. This doesn't make sense. The way dirty deeds normally work is you get half the money up front, you do the dirty deed, and then you go back and get the other half of your money. Therefore, it makes far more sense that Judas went back to those elders or chief priests, or maybe even the Romans, and went to get the rest of his money. And instead of paying him off, they paid him off by stabbing him in the guts. It was probably the Romans. And the Romans could then go out and hang the guy so that all the other conspirators would see, oh, you better keep your mouth shut. If you know something, keep your mouth shut. This is a warning. Hanging people up dead is what Romans like to do. Terrifying people is what Romans like to do. That's what the crucifixion was all about. It was a terror weapon. So is hanging someone with their guts out, so that when they're found in the morning, that's what they would look like. You see, there is no such thing as magic. People don't magically have their guts spill forth when they hang themselves. Their guts pretty much stay where they are. And so it's by applying the principle of following the money and not believing in magic, and also certainly not believing the accounts given in the Bible, because they disagree with each other. The Bible is shamefully lying to you about something. Another take on the death of Judas is the fact that it was Peter that was clearly lying about what happened, and probably what happened was Peter caught up with him that night. Peter knew who Judas was. He was there when he did the betrayal. It was Peter that felt terrible about his own behavior that night. He was the one that caught up with Judas and stabbed him in the guts and hung him from that tree. That makes as much sense. It makes far more sense than the account given by Peter that Judas somehow fell and did it. That's pretty suspicious. Or he fell on his own knife and then managed to hang himself. And before you think it's too crazy an idea that Peter might have murdered Judas, keep in mind that Peter had a sword, he was given a sword by Jesus, and he had already drawn blood earlier that night. He was capable of violence. Notice the negative. And what's noticeable in both accounts is in one, Judas throws the money back, but in the other, he buys a field. But what both of those explanations kind of cover is the fact that when they found him hanging, he didn't have any money on him. And so you need to notice that for a guy that just supposedly made a big score with betrayal, he didn't have any money. It helps to think very cynically, because the Bible was written by cynics to sucker in people who are overly trusting. I need to explain how you tell when the Bible is telling you the truth and when it is lying to you. And it's not that difficult. If the Bible is discussing something that is of public knowledge, then it is probably giving you the facts. If it is explaining something that is secret or hidden, like someone's motivation in their hearts, or that someone's paying a bribe and someone else is throwing back a bribe to those same people, those sorts of things are always a lie. They're always a spin. But the facts that someone was found hanging with their intestines out, those can be counted on to be true. and the spin around them, such as our two passages, what they're trying to do is explain those details. They're uncomfortable details, and they're ascribing, everything they ascribe to them is probably a lie, if that makes any sense. So the things that are public knowledge, probably true. The Bible's explanation, especially when it involves magic, a miracle to account for things that happened, that's always a lie. And so your job is to figure out, why are they lying about this specific thing? In the case of Jesus, you would say, yes, Jesus did arrive in the city, and it was well publicized by, yes, he had 12 disciples. And yes, he did overturn the money changers' tables in the temple. They couldn't say that if it didn't happen, because it would have been a pretty monumental and certainly well publicized thing. In fact, the whole thing with Jesus is publicity, publicity, publicity. So we can believe those facts. What we don't believe is that after 3 hours on the cross, he died and then rose from the grave. We don't believe in magic, so that's our tip-off that they're lying to us about the things surrounding the details. But so you go with, yes, all the things that happened in public were true. You can rely on them to a certain extent. But all the spin is always going to be a lie. And so in the case of Jesus, everything points to a conspiracy between Jesus, the Romans, and the people who are running the temple. I chose the story of Judas to show how the 5 principles work, because it's a little simpler than trying to figure out these symbols of Bosch, because you have to understand a few things about heresy. So this is simpler. But the principles are the same, and you can use the principles just as we used them on this picture. You can use them on the written word, the Bible, if you're bitter and cynical enough. To learn more about heresy and how to read the Bible, get yourself a copy of The Myth Maker by Chaim Maccabee, or Maccabee. It's the man's simply brilliant, and he'll teach you how to read the Bible. And once you understand that, then reading the symbols of Hieronymus Bosch become, if not child's play, then adult's play. Anyway, that was a pretty good Bible lesson, and a pretty good lesson in reading symbols. And I really appreciate you hanging out with me to the last minute while I spill my guts. It's always nice when you can share your soul with a friend. So if you must read the Bible, use the 5 principles of understanding the symbols of Hieronymus Bosch. Thanks for watching.